join me in welcoming Gordo Stonington.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Rocky Mountain Smiths Conference. Welcome to Colorado Rocky Mountain School. Welcome to Colorado for those of you that have come from elsewhere. And thank you to the organization and to those of you that are here, allowing me to share some of what I've gotten from you and what I got from Francis and what I've learned from myself. I'm going to work at a somewhat different level than we have seen from our previous demonstrators. It is much more a personal blacksmithing. I literally have never sold a piece other than to make things for CRMS. And so I really come at this craft, this art, from a personal level. And a lot of that personal level is engendered in this room. I met Francis at the top of that wall as we were building the building. And I like folks, I like people, and I walked over here to see what was going on because I knew that I would be involved in building the building, and saw Francis on a ladder up there, and I just looked at him. I didn't know him, didn't know anything about blacksmithing, and just said to myself, I want to get to know that man. And so I got a ladder, climbed up there with him, and started nailing the log next to him. And he looked at me and he said, I finally figured out why my arm is so tired. This hammer just doesn't bounce off these logs the way it does off an anvil. My introduction to Francis Whitaker. I'm going to start forging so that I can hopefully get through my project. And as ideas come to me, I will bring them up and share them as I can. And I hope that those of you who have also shared Francis's life and skill and forging will share your stories and experiences as part of this. So what I am going to do is I'm going to create a quatrefoil. I am a teacher by profession, I guess. And so the thing is, you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. So here's what I'm going to make. And I'm going to make a frame to put it in. And with luck, the two that I make will fit, and I will collar it together. Well, skill too, but I'll claim luck too. So, starting point for the quatrefoil. I lucked out. I did luck out. I designed the size of my frame first, and then used the string technique. I probably should talk about that. Curves, tape measures don't work well to tell me how much metal I need to do this. So that the trick is, I need to know the distance along the center line of the curve, and a piece of string does that just beautifully. So I took a piece of string, estimated how much material I was going to need to forge out the rosette, and it came out as 10 inches. Wow. That's luck, because it all started from the frame. So all I have to do to set up this is that the quatrefoil is, the ring is welded here, and each of these is a forge weld to establish the mass for the rosette. And so what I need to know is, where is this place, this place, this place, and this place on the bar. So I divide it into 4 pieces, and because the weld is here, I start with half of those distances. So the first one is at 5 inches, 15 inches, 25 inches, and 35 inches. Lucky because it's so easy. No 16ths, no 32nds involved.
And is your bar 40 inches?
Bar is 40 inches.
What is the size of your square?
Outside's 10 by 10.
Outside, 10 by 10.
So the inside is 9 by 9. And I didn't bring my own ruler, and I found one. So 630. All right, how to stash. There's a bunch of soapstone on that table. Would somebody throw me a piece?
Right here,
Great, thank you. Francis lesson. Never measure a piece like this by then going 10 inches. And on a piece like this, it would make relatively little difference. But on a 40-foot rail, you measure every one of those intervals, you could be off by 2 or 3 inches by the end of the rail. So always use the cumulative measurement. So it's 5, 15, 25, and 35. And that's very easy to do because I lucked out at 10 inches. Now, Francis never wanted us to fold these up because he wanted them to last forever, so we kept a 6-footer sitting on a couple of nails over there. Next thing is, soapstone doesn't show worth a damn when the material's hot, so now I will mark it. I have a cutting hardy here, and at each of my marks, interesting problem. As I have aged, I have developed a thing called intentional tremor, which means the more I focus on what I'm doing, the more my hands shake. Many of these operations end up being two-handed as a result. Next Francis lesson. Do first what it's harder to do later. And so if I've curved all this around, it's very hard to set up the end of this for the forge weld. So the first thing I will do is upset it and scarf it. And never leave your hardy in the anvil. This afternoon, I do not have a fire tender. Nothing wrong with people who are working at the level where that is an absolute necessity, which we have observed by our previous demonstrators, that it would be much harder, and they would never communicate with us if they were also having to get those nice pieces of iron that they were working on hot as well. But I work alone, I have my own personal shop, and the fire is very much a part of the whole process for me. I don't even own a propane forge, so I live in propane country, not natural gas. So a bit communing with my fire is part of my pleasure of the hours I spend in the forge. Pardon? It does indeed. But I have to be careful that that thinking doesn't wander off somewhere and I forget what I've got in the fire.
For this small of a project, Francis would say that forge is not a code red.
He would indeed, but I've inherited this fire from someone else, for which I'm very appreciative, and so I didn't feel it was appropriate to get rid of it. I have some infrared absorbing clip-ons that I like, so that when I'm staring into the forge, I don't get that little hot spot and I'm talking too much. Pause for a moment. Let where I am cranking it down cool.
Here it is.
There it is. With this small a stock, it always wants to bend, not upset. So I'm walking around it to try and minimize my pull in any particular direction. But those of you that are in the right direction can see that in fact, I'm bending it anyway. So I will reheat before I try and do a scarf. Of course, Francis would always have done this entire operation with one heat. But he also wouldn't talk. Don't bother me. Slight counter taper so that as I spread it with the scarf, I have somewhere for that metal to go without getting too wide. Don't want those wings. And now I want that end of that scarf as thin as possible so that as I do the weld, it disappears as much as possible. Then I will bend that up more from habit than what will be important for this particular weld. But if this piece were going to be sitting on the anvil, well, actually it will be, you want that scarf end not in contact with this cold metal, which will suck the heat out of it. So when I've got that hot for the weld, I want it to retain its heat as long as possible, and that's where it'll go fastest. I'm going to reheat that so I can quench it. I also don't like burning myself.
The overhead camera is set up for that anvil, not this one.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I was told that. You just noted a little 72-year-old mind. Reminder. That's why I was there to begin with. Another of those lessons, it was interesting. I, at one point, was working across the fire and across the anvil with Francis, and he looked at me and he said, "I wish I could remember everything I know." And I think what he was actually saying was, I wish I could remember to tell you everything I know. And the lesson I'm going to is you want to look at that and make sure that scarf's in the right direction as I start. No, I got to upset it first. That one stayed pretty straight. That's nice. What Francis was saying to me, and I think thinking about to himself, was not remembering what he knew, but so much of what he had developed over his then 60-some years of forging was habitual, and that he didn't think about it as he did it. And so he found it difficult to communicate it to others. And so I think what he was saying was, I wish I could think of all the things I need to tell you. There's the shake. Now, did I do it right?
Yeah. You didn't look, but you did it right.
Had it in the fire right.
Okay.
Okay, again, I'm going to reheat that, so I'm not going to harden it inappropriately by quenching it. So, the next step will be to go on to the forging of the first rosette. Process will be to cut this part way through, fold it back, forge weld the end, neck it down, draw out the rosette. Now, Francis, I'm going to desert you for a moment. Francis built this spring fuller for this next step. And what it has is a gauge to allow the material for the rosette there. This has been used by students and others, so I didn't count on it being here when I got here. So I have created my own process for that. And what I have is a Smith & Magician, and I have created 2 fullering dies. I just bought a piece of 2 by 3/4, which works fine in here, and especially when they are rugged tools like this. It's just mild steel. And I have C-clamped a plate on the back, which gives me that same gauging distance to leave on the other side of the fuller where I am necking down to make that rosette. So I will get it hot, cut it, fold it, get it hot again, forge weld it, neck it, draw out the rosette. My lesson from the last one was stop talking and pay attention. Now, please be aware that when it becomes forge weld time, you folks need to pay attention to what's going on, because I will throw sparks. I'm going to do it right here. So Andy, you get some. I made a mistake already. Anybody got a Sharpie that I could use momentarily? Excellent. Okay, what I learned in setting this up, what did I do with my tape? There it is. Rule. There we go. Is I need 1 3/8 inches in this forge weld. So a Sharpie lasts longer than a piece of soapstone. I suppose a silver pencil or something might well provide this just as well. I'm going to put a mark on the anvil at 1 3/8 inches.
Why are you doing it there on the anvil, as opposed to, like, say, over there?
Whim.
Okay.
Why? Partially because I don't want to work where that mark is and erase it for the next 3 steps. So I'll do a lot of my work over here. I rarely work right there unless I want that sharp edge. I want that rounded for a lot of my work, so I would...
Put a mark in both places.
I could do that too. Habit now, because this is where I've been doing it for a month. Thank you. Sorry, bad throw.
Everybody have 8 glasses?
Wire brush anywhere? Okay, having put that hardy cut in there, I should be able to, there, I can feel my mark. Cut about halfway through. Okay, what I am doing is creating the size of that gap, because what I have learned for my forge welding is that I add flux. When the flux flows well and fills that gap, I'm ready to weld. Bubbles a little bit, then I can come out and weld. So that is my gauge of when my metal is ready to go, is that the gap has filled with the flowing flux and it's bubbling slightly. Thank you. I did get prepped so well as to make sure I had the flux I wanted in there. And a flux spoon. I'm slipping. So bad when habitually it's all in the right place in my forge. There's what I need right there.
What's your flux, Gordo?
Easy weld.
Is it the old kind?
Not the old, but it's a batch I probably bought here 20 years ago, and it's been working quite well. But it's not an irrelevant question, because there was a batch back in there that failed. Drove Francis crazy. He did have a can of the older stuff, and he treated that like gold. Nobody got to use that but him. Okay, now do I have Coke? Poking around in that I want Coke in the fire. Two hands. Let that flux start melting so it doesn't fall off as I turn over. I'm already getting flow between my pieces. Pardon? No, that's the flux itself. It has metal in it. As part of the flux, there are iron filings in it. Okay, I am bubbling. Welding, sparks. And I'm still have enough heat to do my draw. So I have necked down to a little more than the thickness that I'm going to want back at that part of my rosette. And this is the mass I will now draw out for the rosette. I talked a little too much. I could have used the heat to start the drawing process, but I'm sorry. Do you want it on the anvil or on? Let's see. There you go.
Francis always fluxed in the fire. He never took his piece out of the flux. He always fluxed all 4 sides.
Oh, the last one?
He fluxed all sides.
Yes. I feel that on a piece this size, the flow of the flux is sufficient to actually coat all of that and get back this side of the weld. And yes, I definitely want to have enough in there so that the weld is protecting, the flux is protecting as much of that metal as possible.
We never used borax. I think we listened to some of the advertising where easy weld flux said borax poison. And it is to some degree, but I never heard any blacksmith denying borax poison.
Borax to finish like you had a cold set, you use borax.
Okay, I've started to draw out the rosette. If I hadn't stopped to talk, I would have just turned the hammer over and used the cross peen to begin to draw it some more, but I will go get some more heat for that.
Welding the foils on the quatrefoil, Francis went to the end of the power header, the 25 power.
Yes, he did all his drawing under the power hammer of this step. Yes. Yes. Since I don't have a little giant and I personally like to hit the metal, I do the drawing myself. Yes, he would do the weld, the fullering, and the drawing in one heat. Starting in the center, drawing towards the edges, thinking about that back corner. It's hard to get enough material for that part of the rosette. I like to have it smoothly coming out of the collared area. Now I'm out far enough that I can begin to just draw on all dimensions with the face of the hammer. And it rounds nicely under this process. And Francis from anywhere in the shop would have said, "Too cold!" Okay, I'm going to go a little further because I'd like a little more of a rosette. And I may have enough heat for this step. So I'm also pushing in that way to attempt to achieve the curve there that I wish to have. And I forgot to get the appropriate pair of tongs, so I'll use what's handy. Lining it up, get things as square and as straight as I can. And do we have a wire brush handy? Yes. No? Thank you, sir. Rosette number 1. I think I'm a little tight in my curves here, but that's not irreversible, so I can come back to them. In fact, I have what I would like to have achieved. Yep, I pulled them down a little too far. Next weld, I will repeat that process, and it's 3 more of them. Please bear with me. Let's keep telling stories.
One thing, he always wore a brush when he came around the fire.
And then Peter Ross said, but I like the scale in my work, and so I don't wire brush. And
Yeah, but you file.
yes, he did.
It's a mad filer.
Some people wire brush before they put it back in the fire, and I never understood that.
May I do that over there so I don't get the hardy stuck in here? But that was a no-no, walking away from my fire with the piece in there. Nope, wrong side. There it was. Yep. Again, creating the space that seems to work well with my flow of flux and that observation for the step.
Would wrought iron hold over the same that you just did with mild steel? Or would they have
I have never worked with wrought iron, so you would have to ask someone that knows what they're talking about.
And I think it would.
The other thing I am doing here, I have read, and my personal experience won't verify this, but the idea is that you do the weld as soon as the piece is ready. The heat is coming up. As soon as you get there, you are most likely to have a successful weld. Sparks. Almost didn't get that weld far enough. Believe I'm welded in the fuller, but it's opened on this side of it. It's not a crisis, and the rosette I hope will not open up when I forge it out. Pardon?
So this side, I can see a gap. So
Okay.
you'll hit it on the flat, close that up, and then.
Well, that would be my safest bet at this point, would be to go back, reflux that, and get that weld there. So let's do it. Weld sparks. Cooling off. I think I actually did get it. We'll see when we open it up. Now, a comment about fire. This is a grandfather fire that I inherited. When I, as a result, doesn't have as much, the coke, it doesn't have coke in it in the way that I'm used to having coke in my fire. I like to have green coal here that I'm moving down into the fire, getting it to coke, able to chip that into the fire to be a coke supply continually becoming available around it. At this point, I'm not having luck creating that circumstance with this fire. We'll keep going, see what we pull off. Pardon?
You can water it.
More, yes. Nope, didn't weld. In fact, my rosette didn't. The take-home lesson. Didn't do it. But I came prepared for this. I'll be right back. Oh, I'm sorry. You did well.
Supposed to have that one in the water bucket.
That's right. So what happens when you run to the car?
Good.
Am I live? Can you hear me? Good. Well, the other advantage is I don't have to cool this end off now. I can turn around and go to work.
There's a plaque on the wall here that is hand stamped and has to
Bring it out, would you, please?
has to do with the forging
Yes,
after welding. And a few of us were wondering if you knew the story behind it.
I do.
We were wondering who had stamped it.
I don't know the miscreant, but I do know the story of what happened.
I think we're nailed to the wall.
Okay, never mind then. There is a plaque over here that says, when forging after a weld, always make sure that the piece is at a welding heat. And I do not know who the miscreant was, but he broke a weld, as I just demonstrated for you, by forging on it when it hadn't been welded, and he worked cold. And Francis said, you write 40 times or 100 times, when forging after a weld, always make sure the piece is hot. The plaque on the wall has that saying stamped into it. Who was it?
David Berger.
Okay.
Son. He was studying here going.
The rest of the story.
And Francis told him write it on the board, but he decided to overdo it and print it on steel.
So it's on the wall there.
I didn't see David's name on it.
It isn't.
He must not have been very proud of it.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, Gordo, if you had noticed, like, if you noticed that your weld had not completed itself, could you have gone back in the fire and come back out and maybe close that up, do you think, or no?
The second time?
Yes.
No, I was seeing that I had broken it out in the rosette. In one of my practice pieces, I've got one where I was able to go back, get the collar, the fullered section welded, but I still had an opening in the rosette, and it didn't work well. So
That's a tough weld, drawing a weld out edgewise after you welded it flat.
that's got to be a good weld.
Really good weld.
Yes. Checking to make sure I don't have a significant clinker down there. Can't always, oh, there is a beauty. There may well be a significant part of why that well didn't take.
Check the other side of the car park.
Yep. There it is. Thank you, Clay.
Found two big ones yesterday.
And one of the beauties of having worked in this shop with visitors like Andy Morris and Allison and Clay and Dan is they feel comfortable to tell me what I'm doing wrong. And I love it.
Done it before?
And it sure makes a difference.
What do the blinkers do to your well?
They inhibit several things as I understand it, that they are inhibiting the flow of air, they are releasing toxic material as far as the weld is concerned, and they're not burning, they're not hot, so that there isn't coke there being heated, so that probably at least those three factors inhibit the weld.
It makes cold spots in the bottom of your fire.
Exactly.
The air can't go around, they're not hot.
I'm deciding I don't like how open that is. I'm going to close it up slightly. Welding.
Hit it hard. Always put it back in the fire before I go to the other.
To make sure it's hot enough.
Right, get more time.
And I listen to my instructors. And thank you. But we are all talking about, or at least this community, I hope, is talking about sharing ideas, skills to make each of us a better smith. So, anybody else with ideas? Let's hear them.
A lot of times I take 2 times to do my full floor as well, and I know that's not, you aspire to times, but it helps to ensure that you get a good well too.
Get together on both sides.
Now I'm going to go back because that opened up again.
Another thing is when you've got your material in the fire, you can think about heating beyond where you want to weld.
Oh, for sure.
That's another like good little trick.
The other thing I'm doing differently this time that I didn't do last time is I opened it up to get the flux into it. In fact, I think I'm going to back up so far. I think I'm seeing a clinker in there. And I am. Let's get that guy out of there. And when I said I think I'm seeing a clinker in there, what I was seeing was a dark, cold area deep in the fire where it was obviously not burning. Well, we'll see if we can pull this one on. I have a cheater out there. I got all 4 done. Welding, sparks. So following Allison's suggestion, we'll give it every advantage we can by getting it hot before we forge it out the other way. Not a Francis story, but one of my most intensely developing experiences was I spent a year with Andy Morris at the Littleton Historical Museum, in which we both, among other things, were living as early century blacksmiths and demonstrating for the public. And I had the opportunity to forge for several hours a day for a year. And thank you, it made a huge difference.
Switch on. Switch on. It's water, vinegar, salt, ginger, and honey. It's like the hate matters. It's original Gatorade. Really good.
At least the rosette held.
All right.
So I'll forge out the rosette and then we'll see how well we get to spread it. The interesting thought is Francis got sick of coffee cans rusting out for this process. He made a bunch of copper ones. All the clay, it's getting cold. Not quite big enough, but through all that monkeying around, I'm not sure I had quite enough material there. So let's warm it up a little bit, and it looks like we've got the weld holding out. I get to blame. I do this we so that you share all of this with me.
Gordo, what's the dimension?
It's 1/4 by half, the starting material. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to quench the rosette so I can get heat back here without burning it. didn't pull that heat quite back far enough, so I'm going to stop there.
The point being you're trying to make a bigger radius, correct?
Pardon?
The point being you're trying to make a bed a bigger radius.
Yes.
Grab a little right over your vise. Grab it with a pair of tongs right over your vise. That's it.
And I don't have quite enough heat to come back up with that. What's the time factor?
2:45. We're about an hour into it, Gordo.
Okay. Gonna get in your way a sec. Okay, that fairly well pulled that off. As a teacher, I'm going to say, bear with me. You've seen me do 3 of those. You don't not need to watch me do another one. I have another cheat outside with 4 of them done. I will grab that actually. Then the trick is getting this thing shaped so that it fits the square well, and that's a matter of looking at it, pulling it, looking at it, pulling it. Again, a time-consuming process that may not be terribly instructional. So I do have another cheat ready to weld. I'm going to bring in the 4 and the next step. I will be back in a moment. Okay, I was wrong. I welded my already bent one, so we're going to bend this one. And this is making me talk about some other things that I think I would like to talk about. And that is that I was very lucky, in a sense, that when Francis has left us, his family said, "What in the forge do you want, Gordo?" And I said I wanted his bending forks. This is all he used for the vast majority of his work, was these 3 tools for bending. And he did repair it. That one's welded back together again. Oh yes, right. Here we go. And as you can see, this one has been welded back together when it was used being overstressed. And I believe it is true these are made out of road grader blade for the get some good strong steel.
Storyboard in his office, this project.
Oh, for the Quatrefoil, oh, very definitely. Yeah, all those steps that I'm showing you, if you didn't get it this time, it's on the wall in there.
There's patterns for this too somewhere.
Oh, for this is in the cookbook. He's got full-scale drawings.
But there was some cardboard patterns I thought.
That may be too. Allison speaks from experience. She made a couple. Then she was using one of them, and may I? She broke it, and so she made another couple.
Yes, I did. But that grater blade you can get it from your CNC place because they break it all the time, and the material is kind of curved, so you have to flatten it before you cut out your shapes. But it's super hard, and you don't have to do anything to it except for try to make it softer to make it to the shape that you need, essentially.
What's the new stuff that has the carbide in it? You know anything about that stuff?
What is the new stuff?
Yeah, they have a new grater blade they're using that actually has a carbide strip all along the bottom side of it.
One thing is very important on those things, and is the bottom needs to be flat,
Structure looks like a
not
Here, yes.
Bend the piece of stock and leave a bar.
Okay, what Clay is sharing with us is in the bottom here, that's not rounded. That is flat, so your stock can sit right down in there and isn't being held by the fork in a different place.
Doesn't leave a mark. You got the flat bottom. You got the round bottom.
So one thing that I feel about bending is whatever you develop as your own bending technique, do the same thing always. What is easy to do is to put the piece in there and sometimes pull, sometimes push, sometimes do it here and pull. The more you can be doing it the same, they don't all bend the same way. When this is pulling out that way, it's different than when it is pulling in this way, the forces I'm putting into it. So the suggestion is, get whatever works best for you. I like pulling, I don't like pushing at all because I don't like barking my knuckles when I use a wrench. And so I'm going to do a quick and dirty bend of this. I would come back, if I do it that way, to get the shape that I'm going to need. But for today, I'd rather demonstrate the weld. For this kind of a piece, one of Francis's dictums were no flat spots. He wanted a curve everywhere. And the smoother and evener it is, no kinks, no tighter spots, that it is I'm going to now talk as a math teacher. The second derivative can't have any zeros in it. Now I also use this tool holding the weld so I can get closer to it.
Keep you pulling your wheel apart.
Pardon?
That keep from pulling your wheel apart.
Oh yeah, that for sure.
Do you have a stake for welding that?
So what I'm looking at this point is I want those to be at 90 degrees. And I'm almost there. This one ought to come in a little bit, but I'm going to go on and pull the rest around. This has more curvature than what would work for my frame, so that I would need to come back, and this will need to be a little straighter, and that would need to be a little more curved to pull off what I...
Now, typically, Gordo, you have a drawing that you're going back and forth to, right?
I did it this way.
Okay.
Yes, I did it. I had a drawing on a piece of sheet metal that fit this, to which, as Andy said, I could go to, and that was very much a must from Francis, have a full-scale drawing of what you're doing to work from. And so, yes, I would do it that way too.
How close are you?
I'm not bad,
I was going to say, you look pretty good.
but I was right. Needs to be a little bit straighter right in there.
So two other things would be, when you were using the bending forks, you did the hand tool, you came up from underneath. That was another thing. And then also not working the material such that you have a black heat versus a cold heat right next to it when you're bending, because you get a difference in how you're bending, correct?
Absolutely. And so the reason for coming up under is if we're this way, we tend to relax that hand a little bit and you introduce a twist. There's a little one in there already, but it can be really aggravated by, the other thing is you can see what you're doing.
So in what cases are you using,
Pardon?
what cases when you're using forks, are you doing the one that's hot and one that's cold? When you make those decisions, as far as if it's pulling it out of the forge and also doing it when it's completely cold?
This weight material works just fine cold. If you were really trying to work with bigger material that's going to need to be hot in order to be bent, then Allison's dictum, I think, would come into play. Have I answered your question? Am I staying out of your way pretty well? Or should I work here? I know that, but how about for the photographer? No. I was talking, not thinking. All right? You've seen me doing this. We need to take a break. Why don't you let me finish this during the break, and you guys go refresh. They need to change the